Place Brand Observer is also a big playground, and I am learning new skills. Like now, we're starting the podcasting, which is super exciting.
Welcome to Place Brand Leaders, the interview podcast of the Place Brand Observer. I'm Florian Kaefer, and in this podcast, I introduce you to some of the world's leading place reputation gurus and community champions. I'm interested in how they tick, what inspires them, and how they help their city, region, or country attract visitors, investors, or talent. Before we continue with today's show, let me introduce you to Aleks Vladimirov, my co-host and the producer of this podcast. For this very first episode, he interviews me about the Place Brand Observer, how it all began, and why we decided to make a podcast. I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did, and of course, would love your feedback. A big thank you to our subscribers and partners for trusting the Place Brand Observer and for making this podcast possible. You want to know more about nation brand evaluation, country reputation, or how to attract talent and investors to your city? Visit the business profiles of brand finance, future place leadership, and other specialists in our directory, all on placebrandobserver.com.
But then obviously this is the first time we're having a long conversation. So the key question is a bit of your background, but obviously with a specific focus on not just that 12 years of observing the field of place branding, but when was the first time that something like place branding even came to your attention?
When I started my PhD studies in New Zealand, before that I had never heard about place branding. I never heard about branding, I think, or brands. I never thought about brands like what I know now about them. And so when I did my master's in England, I heard about an opportunity to join a research team in New Zealand. And they were looking into the perceived credibility and potential vulnerability of New Zealand's branding. So it's positioning as a destination, but also as an exporter of, apples, lamb, maize, a really high quality produce. At the time, they had some issues with perception, so there were some environmental things going on in the country, and that's how I came to get to know place branding, or this whole business around the reputation and image of places. And I think back then my background in sustainability or sustainable development was what really got them interested, because that was the topic they had, that question, how sustainable are they perceived to be? And so this is quite a long time ago, almost 10 years.
Okay. And since then, obviously, you've been dealing with the Place Brand Observer. I can see then you've also launched the Sustainability Leaders project. But I guess I'm interested to hear just a little bit, obviously, because it's a long time. What have you noticed has changed in the quote unquote field of place branding?
The field of place branding, I think you're doing right in quoting it because it's very diverse. It's very multi field like. So depending who you talk to, and over the years I've talked to, well, as you know, to I think it's like over 250 people now that we publish their interviews on the website. And the interesting thing is that everybody has a different idea about what exactly place branding is supposed to mean. So it really depends. You talk to an economic development professional, or a destination marketer, or an academic who just came up with a new concept, to explain place branding. What I have seen also, or experienced also attending the conferences over time, is that it has matured. So people now have better understanding about what place branding is and isn't, and especially maybe also how it differs from place marketing. So, you know, we have this long-term angle in place branding that is really about the vision, the strategy. So you're thinking about like 5 years, 10 years when you do place branding, maybe even 15 or longer. And this is something people had to learn. I think that it differs from place marketing, which is more campaign oriented. So short term, maybe next season, and how do we position ourselves to attract a specific audience, like working moms, or, you know, very different. And so this is one thing I noticed, that the conversation around place branding has also changed quite a lot. Learn from each other in a way, and you know, so to connect back to your question about how the Place Brand Observer started, this is actually the motivation I had at the very beginning. So to connect between places, but also between academia and practitioners, so we can sort of just learn from each other. Because, you know, as I mean, you're doing your PhD right now, and you know that a lot of academic work probably never gets to the practitioners.
Yeah.
And the other way around as well. So the problems that practitioners face, like place makers, place marketers, place branders, maybe academics don't really know about what's really going on there either. So the observer is kind of the meeting place, or at least that's the idea.
I found it that way. I got in touch with my supervisor because I was helping with the Place Brand Observer back in the day, editing interviews, and I was editing the interview with Gary Warnaby, my supervisor, and I was like, well, that you just make sense, everything you say. And then eventually, when an opportunity popped up, I applied and I got in. So it definitely worked.
Yeah, that's really cool, and it's good to hear that. These interviews, they're not really interviews only; they're more portraits of people, because the kind of questions we try to ask are really about them. So again, there's links to place branding, that we try to figure out the identity. So what's that person like? Who is this? And then what they think about it, and their perceptions of the field of place branding or economic development or talent attraction. So there's no interviews like the other, and even having done 250 now, it just, you know, I want to do another 250 because it's just cool. It's really interesting to hear their stories.
Yeah, and it's interesting now that you're gonna actually be doing a lot of that in audio, right? You're gonna talk to people. Obviously, I don't know if you're conducting your interviews actually verbally, or did you just send them to people as text? But now, obviously, being in a different format as a podcast, that would be quite interesting. Because as we were talking as well, it made me think not just about how interviews would work in podcast form, but also that white paper. Because I read it and I was like, oh, everybody from the panel, I can literally hear their voice. So the ones that I know their opinions, I'm like, this is the kind of thing that you would be about. But then imagine if that's in a podcast form, right? The white paper, you invite them as a panel discussion or one by one. There will be people that want to hear that.
I think you're right. Maybe it won't be just interviews, but also discussions around specific topics. And we can think about that, because as you will support us as producer, we will very much do the podcast together, and just consider it a big experiment, and just play with the possibilities as well. Definitely make sure that it is relevant as much as it is entertaining and for us enjoyable. I think we should have a lot of fun with it as well, don't you think?
Oh yeah, I think I've been reflecting on what's the underlying philosophy of podcasting that people don't tend to talk about, and being fun and just speaking your mind is one part. I mean, normally, if you've listened to anything on TV, radio, some of the other forms, it's a lot more scripted, right? And people are probably reacting to that, you know, the scripting, the sound biting, and just crafting concepts and that can be repeatable. In a long form or podcast, it just seems that that's not in the game. There is a reaction against that a little bit. But
I think scripting has its role when you represent an organization, and you really have to be careful what you say, otherwise you get fired. But
yeah.
or especially a political organization. But if you're free and independent like us, I think people are just bored by scripted conversations and even interviews, especially on TV. I don't watch much TV because I get bored very easily, and I know how the system works, how TVing works, and what's going on in the background. And what we see as consumers is just, it can be such a fraction of what the person has said or what went on. And and if someone does just interviews you on the street, of course you're taken aback. You're like, oh wow, okay, now I have a camera in front of my face, and what do I say? So this is one reason why we do the interviews only by email. So our experts, the people we interview, they have time to reflect, to think about their answers, because many of these answers are really full on. So what have you learned over the last 5 years doing this and that? What are your key insights? What advice would you give to newcomers to the field? So you really need to reflect on these questions. You cannot just, some people might be able to, like Robert Govers or, these very skilled speakers and very experienced speakers, they will be able to just answer this right away. But I think most of us I would need time to think about it, and then to make sure it makes sense by reading it again the day afterwards, maybe. Yeah, the podcast I think will be complementary, so not either podcast or written interview, but then maybe more follow-ups with people we have interviewed, so we know their story already, and know what they do, so we have the background information, and then we already have a rapport. They know the observer, and we know them, and so it's much easier to have a conversation with them that way than if you approach something completely new, someone new.
Yeah, that makes sense. But also, when you were talking, it made me think when you said that people might, in an interview style, kind of you might not get the best of them if there's something they really need to think about. So I did notice when I was recording some of the previous episodes that recording in two parts or recording a second bit was kind of useful, being able to reflect. But then also there's a question. I've never thought about a podcast whereby maybe you just ask people to record themselves speaking, and that might make them feel comfortable that they can edit for themselves if that's what they want to do. Because I noticed that what made people uneasy in some of the conversations that I've recorded, I had to always stress, the ultimate end point of this being released is if you're okay with it. Until you're okay with it representing you, we're not releasing it. So I've got nothing to gain in misrepresenting what you're saying. So that might give one more set of freedom, but I don't know how comfortable everybody is recording themselves and editing. But
you're right, and I think most people are not comfortable being in front of a microphone or a camera. This is just usually not our nature, not in our nature to go up the stage and share our views with the rest of the world. There's some people who really love it and get kick out of it, but most of us are a bit more cautious, I think. And so I think the key of a good podcast is that you have a conversation rather than something more stage-like. And this comes back to trust, I think. So the person needs to know you, needs to trust you. And this is something that happens over time. And I hope that, having been around for like almost 10 years now as the Place Brand Observer, I have earned some of this trust and reputation that people can trust me, that I will not cut the bad parts in or leave the good parts out, for you in this case. And of course, I mean, everybody has to be comfortable with what comes out of it. And we always, also with the written interviews, we always send them a version for approval. So we never just publish. We always send them the final version, and then they can say, oh, I didn't actually mean it this way, or there's something missing there. I think that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, it's at the end of the day their views. Okay, so then obviously people would trust you as the place brand observer, but we've also talked about doing a podcast with your other initiative around the sustainability leaders project. How do you envision that looking?
I think that we'll do a very similar thing, because the Sustainability Leaders project is, although it's much less commercially focused, the Place Brand Observer isn't very commercial either, but it's still the money-making enterprise. Otherwise, it would not sustain itself. The Sustainability Leaders project is more of a passion of mine. I think this is really something I love to do, giving voice, giving stage to individuals around the world who are doing exceptionally cool things to help their community or their business to be sustainable or more sustainable. And so we publish one interview per week. That's pretty much all we do there. And I think the podcast will be very similar in terms of structure, maybe focusing on people we have already interviewed over the last years, and then just following up with them. What are they doing? What are the challenges they face? What are they achieving? What questions might people from the readers, the audience have? I think we should also do that for the Place Brand Observer podcast. Just ask them, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, since we have very active community on social media, we should involve them and just ask them, what did you always want to know about the Place Brand Observer, or about the specific city, or about attracting talent or investors, or being sustainable. So I think this will be very similar. But since the audience is a bit different, we will do two podcasts. So one focused on sustainability leadership and entrepreneurship, and the other on places, their image, identity, and reputation. So, but of course, we can then, in each podcast, we can also talk about what is going on in the other podcasts or in the other community.
Yeah. Okay. And I've been thinking about how that can actually be done, so that we try something different. And it'll be interesting to actually talk to the people. Obviously, we're talking to them as experts. You'd be interviewing them, but it's interesting to actually ask them about their own experience of place. And then, because always it's like a sleight of hand, where when you ask people about place, you're really asking them about themselves quite a bit. So I think that could be a nice way of engaging people that might not necessarily be as deep into this as us. But recruit some people to get interested, because I think how I got interested in it, I was like, wait, you can actually be like a specialist in just cities? That's cool. Like, cities are cool, like for me specifically, but obviously there's the countries
and I mean, I think we've interviewed so many experts in place branding by now that even my focus and interest is moving a little bit more to people who have an inspirational story to tell, or who have solutions for people who work in place branding. But so our interviewees don't necessarily have to be place branding people. To give you an example, next week we will publish our interview with John Strelici, who, not sure I pronounced his surname right, but so he's a best-selling author. I think his book sold 6 million copies or more. And so his idea of the big five for life and purpose of existence, and these are all things that matter to everyone, and so to everyone and individually, but also to every community. So what are your big five achievements in life? What do you want to achieve? What is your purpose of existence? And if communities, destinations or cities ask themselves these questions, And John will, in the interview, he will tell them how they can do it, how they should do it next week. Or whenever this podcast is published, it will be on the website already.
Yeah.
And so this is leadership insights and new ideas and inspiration. And I hope that we can do more of this in the future. So also maybe with the podcast, feature more place representatives. So learn more about places themselves, not only about advisors or academics and their experience with place branding. That would be cool.
Okay. Nice. Yeah, that's interesting with the 5. I'm gonna have a read, because actually one of the questions I asked people in my PhD research is, if you had to put your top 5 priorities, how would you do it? Because I'm interested in the struggle that people might have to do that and the process that they get to it, because traditionally in economic thinking that should be in everyone's head at every point in time and very well structured in order.
Yeah, read his book, definitely. He has
Okay.
the solutions in it, and he wrote some other books as well about the cafe at the end of the world or something like this. So he's very well known, especially in the US, but I think worldwide now, for this kind of identity thinking, like who am I, what do I want to achieve? And this applies to places as much as it applies to the individuals we feature at the Sustainability Leaders Project, because they all found or many of them found their purpose of existence. So they put everything they have, all the knowledge, all the resources, into one project or into one specific area of making places more sustainable. So we will soon publish an interview with a lady who is really good at the marine environment and keeping it clean and getting a lot of media coverage for it. And I think so much is changing now. Maybe it's the new generations coming in, or maybe it's that people start to understand, okay, Corona is bad, the climate crisis will be worse. Maybe it's starting to, people start to realize that maybe we really have to do something now. So those who are doing things now get a lot of attention. And we noticed that the Sustainability Leaders Project is really, the audience is growing very fast. So we noticed that there's huge interest in sustainability, not as an abstract term, with what does sustainability mean, or we can discuss that in another podcast episode maybe, but really hands-on practice and what are people doing and how are they succeeding. And yeah,
I'm quite interested in that, because obviously in the day job, I just literally, a lot of my questions are, how do you do this? Show me. And people literally go, well, I send an email this way because I watch people, use websites, and it could be tedious, but I think to people might be obvious because they're doing it. But taking that out and mapping it out really well and then making it into a practical, rules of thumb, how can you do that? I think it's going to be important, because we're no longer at the stage where we even are allowed the luxury of having conceptual discussions about everything all the time. It's how do you do this?
Well, we are in a post-truth era, so concepts are great for those who believe in them, and those who don't, you need to convince them in any other way, and that might be regulation, or that might be financial monetary rewards or pressure or something else. But yeah, it's the one right way seems to not exist anymore, and this is the same in place branding. I mean, I'm right now writing a book on place branding, in which I try to summarize some of the main learnings that I had from talking to all these specialists and great people, many of them being so successful with what they do as well. And so I'm trying to put it all together, and hopefully will be interesting and inspiring, and maybe, well, unlikely to be as inspiring as the book that Simon Anholt just published. Did you see that?
Yeah. I've just bookmarked it on my wish list for audiobooks. At the moment, I'm listening to book by Antonio Damasio. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but his research is around feelings and the actual biology of feelings. Because obviously I talk too much about feelings and emotion in the context of place, but I need to just double check how that works biologically as well. Not going to be a specialist on it, but a little bit.
Emotions are so important, and one question we asked our panel last year was about the role of emotions in place branding. So it's really, really important. But if you get a chance to read Simon's book, do it. It's really entertaining, and you can learn a lot about places and place branding and how governments are approaching it and often failing at it, and it's really cool. And so this, I aspire to be at least a little bit as inspiring and entertaining as his book. But
I mean, you've got enough material that you would have observed and that you've got on the website that surely you can turn into a really good book.
But that's also a problem because I have so much information and little time. So of course I could publish a series of 20 books with all the information I have, but so we'll try to just spread it out by the podcast and white papers, and so a bit of a combination of many things.
Oh yeah, you've studied media, it's there's many new ways, and I've actually got, obviously during Corona, got some time, so I actually did a lot of online courses. I have to say some of them are good to go through the motions and just like break it down into lessons. The sense of achieving a task is good. Obviously that's just that is a design thing as well that you need to consider on your website. It's different look of it, right? I mean, I've covered what I wanted to talk about. Do you think there's anything else that you'd want to bring up? Because looking at the time, I'm gonna have to shoot off in a bit.
Yeah. There are so many things to talk about, and I think it's good. It's really cool that we had this first talk, and I have a lot of things in mind, a lot of ideas that we can talk about in future conversations. And I think it's really cool. I'm excited to start a podcasting thing, because usually you're right. I used to be more the person setting the stage or facilitating interviews and helping other people express their ideas and share their learnings. And I think it's time that I share my learnings, because otherwise waste of time or waste of information. I think it's really, because I know so many people now working in this field.
Thanks for listening to Place Brand Leaders, the podcast of the Place Brand Observer. I'm Florian Kaefer, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have feedback on today's show, email me, florian@placebrandobserver.com. I'd love to hear from you. Join me again next time for more place branding stories, interviews, and insights from industry pros. You'd like to get the most of the Place Brand Observer? Join our premium program for full access to all stories on placebrandobserver.com and much more.